Back in 2008, a new type of headphone debuted. They were designed to fill a void and appeal to people who were listening to music like hip hop and trance and electropop. They had a new musical tonality and approach. They were all about three things: bass, bass, and more bass. The Beats by Dr. Dre proved to be so wildly popular they spawned a legion of imitators for good or ill. And now the Beats line includes true wireless earbuds, Bluetooth speakers, and the subject of a review here, the Beats Studio Pro headphones aimed at a wider listening audience. For the Absolute Sound, I'm John Quain. The Beats Studio Pro wireless headphones may not seem like something that's typically in our wheelhouse, but the brand has definitely grown up and they're worth taking a listen to. These over-the-ear headphones are still modestly priced at about $350, but they represent a marked improvement over previous Beat generations. Yes, they have very much inherited the same sonic personality of those early models, continuing to favor lower bass notes and high volumes. If rap and speed metal, or you're looking for that kind of music, and you want to block out the cacophony of like a daily commute to work, then you'll appreciate what the Beats Studio Pros have to offer, most definitely. These are not for folks that are going to sit back in their beanbag chair on a Sunday afternoon and listen to Purcell. On the other hand, Apple has done a lot to improve the balance of the Beats Studio Pros while retaining some of those lower end frequencies. These are sort of like the Toyota Corolla of headphones. In other words, your daughter would be happy driving it, and so could your grandmother be happy driving it. These headphones aren't going to make you sit up and take notice at what you're listening to. On the other hand, they have a tendency to smooth over some of the rough spots of lower resolution music content, and that could be a good thing. The Beats Studio Pro use dual diaphragm 40mm drivers that are supposed to improve efficiency according to the company. Those drivers are pretty standard. They're not larger or smaller than most headphones in this over-the-ear headphone size. And they have also 4 built-in microphones, and that's usually for noise canceling, for transparency mode, which picks up sounds from outside, and if it's a safety issue, brings in traffic noises, let's say if you're walking down the street. And there's also a conversation mode, so that's for making phone calls over these headphones as well. The headphones come with a soft carrying case, 2 cables, a USB-C port, and a 3.5mm analog audio jack as well. Now that USB-C port means these headphones have their own built-in DAC, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you're listening to your content. If you're listening to music through an outboard DAC that you've already invested in, it's probably not going to compete with the DAC in these headphones. On the other hand, if you're coming from a set of analog, let's say earbuds that you've been using, then the DAC in these headphones going digital over that USB-C port is going to clean up the sound, most definitely make it a lot crisper and cleaner. So you'll appreciate that difference. You can also charge the headphones through that USB-C port. They're rated for about 24 hours of life after a single 2-hour charge. That's pretty good, and that's using the noise canceling features and the transparency mode. If you shut those off, the company claims these will go 40 hours without those features. To control the headphones, there is the usual multi-tap routine that you have to memorize. Single push of the big B button on the headphones will pause or play music, where you can answer or decline a call. To raise or lower the volume, there's an up and a down button on these. And also handy, you can switch between the active noise cancellation and transparency mode just by pressing that B button twice. From a purely sonic perspective, there are certainly headphones out there in this price range that deliver more balanced tonality and more open spatial sense of a soundstage. But those models are usually wired. They don't have noise canceling. They are open-backed generally, so they don't provide the privacy that these do if you're listening in a public space. And they can't be used generally for making phone calls. All those are features that the Beats offer here. And also, Apple certainly knows and understands its market here. These are for listeners who need convenience, mobility, and connectivity, and want to block out the rest of the world when they're listening to music, not listen to music in the privacy of their own living room. Beats have also not abandoned their original sonic persona, as I alluded to before. That means there's still plenty of lower end oomph. And these headphones are meant to be driven at pretty high sound pressure levels. Otherwise, they can seem a little lethargic. This generation of Beats also delivers on improved definition and crisper transients, I would say, so you can make out the separate instruments that you maybe couldn't quite hear or pick out before in previous generations. However, all those instruments kind of appear on the same plane, a little crowded presentation, not a terrible soundstage, but not what you might find on some other wired models. That means you might miss a few of the subtle production details, and maybe the thrill of, say, a Jake Giles opening guitar salvo won't sound quite as sharp as it would in other headphones. But most of the time, people are going to be using the wireless mode anyway, and there's some sacrifice in sound quality and definition when you do that. On the other hand, using that USB-C connection, I found the Beats onboard DACs were pretty clean and pretty good, if a little bright, as if they were trying too hard to please. With rock, the sound sounded a little more mashed together, even at modest volumes in particular. So again, you have to sort of bring the volume up to bring these headphones to life. It also seemed like there was a metallic sheen to some vocals that I heard. But again, that is also a matter of taste. It'll appeal to some listeners and not to others. A material that's arguably best suited to the Beats personality, the headphones do rather well. Consider electronica from the French duo Air and their classic album, Moon Safari from 1998. On several tracks, the mid-range sounds pleasingly punchy, and there's a good, robust separation of the instrumentation, the electronic instrumentation on those tracks. On the other hand, the lower bass notes are a little boomy and the soundstage a little narrow. And the Beats, like other headphones, can overemphasize some elements in favor of others, such as the whirring background to some of the sound effects and bearing a little bit of the 808 melody line sometimes in the mix. The trip hop of, let's say, 07 confirms some of these impressions. In the Waiting line, that song from Simple Things, that album, it brought out the fact that the breathiness of the vocals and the lightness, which really sort of carries you along in the song, sounded a little almost too clean, a little antiseptic, as it were, rather than full of that smoky nightclub pensiveness. Jazz recordings revealed also some sonic differences with there's an Ambrose Akimusiri album. It's also called Owl Songs. The Beats did justice to Bill Frisell's guitar work, for example, but when it came to Ambrose's trumpet, it sounded a little thin, almost as if it were Herb Alpert rather than Miles Davis. It's not to say this is right or wrong, it's just, again, a different sonic profile. On Monk's classic album, Live at the Jazz Workshop, Charlie Rouse's sax sounds precise notationally, almost more precise than it actually was. It's as if the corners have been rounded off some of the notes. There's less spittle to some of the reeds, shall we say. Classical pieces such as Beethoven's Eroica with those opening chasing stanzas. Recording I like is Ivan Fischer conducting the Budapest Festival Orchestra. They can seem to be lacking in some detail in the richness of the strings. Mostly the harmonics of the recording hall are sometimes lost a little bit. Some of those details the Beats Studio Pro will miss, but you can't complain that the instruments themselves are missing. They're all there all right, just a little, again, rounded off. Another example, and sort of demonstrates some of the compressed dynamic range, especially if you're listening over wireless, which is going to happen, is an album like Hold Your Zuke's movie album. It's all about dynamic range. It's wildly different, incongruous source material that goes from acoustic instruments to recorded samplings of old radio recordings. The Beats Studio Pros deliver some reasonable detail there, but they kind of lack the liveliness and they miss the sort of playfulness of the vocals again. Can you tweak the beats if you're not exactly the sonic profile is to your liking? Not really, because there's no multi-band equalizer in the app that some other headphones may offer, and there's just 3 sound profiles. There's one for signature, which is just basically Beats music profile, entertainment, which is designed for movies and gaming, and conversation, which is designed for those phone calls. Now, no matter how faithful the headphones are in sonic reproduction, or how much you love the sound profile of a set of headphones, or how many features they have, If they're not comfortable, you're not going to use them. I've found the Beats create a fair amount of fatigue for me, and it's not the sonic profile. It's not because they're too bright or too boomy. It's because the band here is a little inflexible, and for my head, doesn't quite suit me. So it's quite rounded, and I find it sort of rests heavily on my head. Now, these aren't really heavy headphones. I should make that clear. They're about 260 grams, which is not heavy for cans this size, not by any means. They're lighter than similarly sized headphones. But again, for my particular head, and everybody's head is different, they're not as comfortable as they could be. I've conferred with other reviewers and friends, and they find them very comfortable, but also try them, before you make a commitment to a set of headphones, I find. They will certainly block out your environment, and that's a tremendous advantage. If you're part of the Apple ecosystem, you've probably played around with one of their music formats, that spatial audio format to them. And the Beats Studio Pros support that format. They're owned by Apple, after all. It aims to go for like a surround sound effect, if you're not familiar with it. I didn't find it particularly appealing on music, and oddly, it didn't seem to really expand the soundstage most of the time. On the other hand, where it does work is if you're going to use this for late night movie watching. In that case, it will improve the intelligibility of soundtracks that you'll hear and the sort of impact of movie soundtracks. Better still is the Beats noise canceling feature. A lot of people want that, especially if you're using these to travel with. It worked well enough on several air flights that I took. On jets, it muted that sound, that sort of rumbling background, constant sustained sound of the jet engines. Definitely worked against that. It's not as effective as some other brands that are famous for that. Say Bose does a slightly better job at eliminating background noises. And no set of noise canceling, active noise canceling even, is going to eliminate the chatter or yammering of somebody a few rows behind you going on about a family fight they recently had. So the effectiveness also, I should mention, is because these are enclosed over your ears, if you wear glasses, it will break the seal a little bit and reduce some of the effectiveness of the noise canceling. Just a note to be aware of. One other area that normally you wouldn't think of for a set of headphones, but the Beats Studio Pro really excelled at, was in making phone calls with the wireless headphones. I made several calls, different situations on different networks, and everybody testified to the fact that the call came through clearly without any echo or digital reverb happening. You would think that's a normal thing for headphones that are in this market and are aimed at mobility as well, but it's not always standard. Not many people do it well, so they should be noted for doing a really excellent job in that area. Ultimately, the Beats Studio Pros do really well in terms of connectivity and convenience, and they're definitely an improvement over previous iterations of the Beats headphone line. They do retain some of that distinctive bass dominant sound, so if that profile appeals to you, so will these headphones. For The Absolute Sound, I'm John Quain. If you like these reviews, please subscribe to our channel online and also consider subscribing to our print publication as well. Feel free to leave any comments and hit that like button.